I thank the witness for his testimony, and one of the things that I very much appreciate is that you brought actual solutions and ideas of how you see things that can be fixed and addressed in addressing this program. So I appreciate the testimony from all 5 of you. And the chair will now recognize the members for 5 minutes of questioning, beginning with myself. Mr. Newland, in your testimony, you mentioned that BIA was working to resolve the 3 recommendations to resolve unspent funds and create better processes for closing out funds. Can you explain how the BIA has and is implementing further changes, and how many closeouts have happened since the report was actually released?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I can report that by the end of this fiscal year, we anticipate having 141 of the 183 listed contracts in the IG report effectively closed out. And we are working on the other 42 agreements, or with the tribes for those other 42 agreements, to make sure that we're able to continue to support their efforts to spend down those funds. With respect to the other 2 recommendations, in the IG's report, we are working to create the information and IT systems that were included in those recommendations, and estimate that we'll complete testing on that system by the end of this fiscal year. On the 3rd recommendation, we are targeting the end of the calendar year for closing out that recommendation.
Thank you. Could you also please elaborate on your testimony regarding the Progress Act's Negotiated Rulemaking Committee? And specifically, what I'd like you to discuss is what major obstacles are left to discuss, and is the committee on track to meet their final rule proposal extended deadline of December 21st of this year?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are effectively, or essentially, at the end stage of the negotiated rulemaking, where the committee meets with federal officials to hash out the language of the rule. What's left to do is finish drafting the text of the rule and propose it and engage in consultation. And we do expect to complete that work by the statutory deadline.
Okay, thank you. I would also like to question President Deborah Dotson. President Dotson, you provided testimony regarding reporting windows and how those windows do not always align with tribal program years. Why doesn't each tribe just operate their programs on a federal fiscal year? And is there a hardship created with realigning programs with the federal fiscal year?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your question. We have the right to set our programs and our fiscal years when we would like to, and which best serves our people. And if we were to put our fiscal years with the government's fiscal year, we could lose funding if we did that. So we want to have the maximum funding to serve our people.
Okay. And for President Harvier, your testimony mentions the impact of assuming functions of the Land Title and Records Office. How have the improvements you've made helped your tribe integrate with other communities in the Phoenix metro area?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think for the previous leadership of our community for many years, and because of our location around the metropolitan area and the cities that surround our community, we've always tried to have good relationship with their surrounding cities. And currently we have agreements, for example, with solid waste water agreements with our surrounding cities. So being a self-governance tribes, it makes it easier for us because we have control over what we're doing on our side in working with the cities. For example, our law enforcement. Currently our law enforcement are cross-deputized. And it's always a concern in Indian country when outside law enforcement come into Indian country. I think our relationship, because of our self-governance compact and having our law enforcement cross-deputized, there's that discussion and that relationship that we have because of self-governance that we're able to work with the surrounding cities.
That's all very good. Thank you. And just another question is, how has your ability to shorten bureaucratic times for documentation that would usually take the BIA so much longer impacted economic development on the reservation?
Well, that was a big plus for us in taking the land records and titles over as a community. You know, with the development that happens within our community, I think developers that are wanting to develop and have a site chosen, they want to be able to move things along. So with having the land records and titles in-house and the timeframes that we meet, I think it assures the developers that a project can start on time and things can start moving instead of having to wait to go through the process of waiting months. So it's been a big benefit to the community for economic development in our community.
It sounds like it has benefited everyone to be able to do this, to process these documents on a much faster basis. So thank you for that. I'm now going to recognize the other members of the committee, and I would recognize Ms. Ledger-Fernandez for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And thank you, President Harvier, for pointing out how much your tribe actually provides to carry out the functions that the federal government, in its trust responsibility, is supposed to be doing, right? It's more than a 2-to-1 ratio, right? I'm curious, and I would like to ask President Dotson and Chair Andrews-Maltais whether you also provide tribal funds to meet these obligations in order to for the compacting contracting that you do. And then a second one is whether you also compact contract IHS functions, or is it just all BIA, BIE?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we provide funding to initiate programs that we have a shortfall in, and we do not contract for IHS.
Chairwoman?
Thank you for the question. We are actually self-governance on both the Indian Health Services as well as BIA for about 20 years. And because the funding is so inadequate, we wind up by having to, terminology now is called braiding, but we use grants to supplement the programs and services that we are able to provide for our community members, because without the ability to redesign, we wouldn't be able to administer the programs and the services the way that they need to meet our people's needs.
Right, the flexibility that compacting provides and the flexibility within the IHS system in terms of the multiple sources of revenue really makes a difference. And I think that's the point that was made in Undersecretary Newland's testimony about the benefits of the leasing program. President Harvier, do you also compact IHS?
We just built a new health facility in our community. And, right now, I guess what we're going through is a process in working with more on the IHS side, I guess, in building the community, taking that project over as a self-governance project. I get the situation that we faced after the project was completed. It's the startup cost that we incurred as a community, and now trying to get those funds reimbursed. Those are some of the issues that we face, and I'll just say, I think we've been blessed as a community to be able to add more funding to programs that are so necessary for our members. But there are a lot of tribes out there that don't have that opportunity, and that's where, to me, as a tribe, we're not really being able to service our members the way we would like to, and how important that funding is to the tribes and getting it out at a proper time.
Secretary Newland, I have a couple of questions. One is, given the inability of smaller tribes, although it's really amazing, like the number you gave was that in your testimony that 887 million of the 892 million of our American Rescue Plans, you actually were contracted and compacted. That's really great, and thank you for doing that. I think that's important. But I'd like you to address two things. One is what we might do to think about how we help smaller tribes do not have a supplemental source of funding for these programs to compact and contract more. And two, we heard testimony from several witnesses about the timeliness of actually getting the money. Some suggested that Congress should actually put it into the law. Well, it's kind of already in the law. And so can you tell me what you're doing to make sure that that's there so we don't, how do we get the money to the tribes quickly? What are you doing to make sure that happens?
Thank you, Ranking Member. Both of your questions are actually related to your first observation about moving the rescue plan money through Public Law 638 contracts. Is the team that we have in Indian Affairs at the department, when they have the resources to do the work, they're able to move this money out and move it quickly. The challenge with getting money out in a timely manner and then meeting the closeout obligations on the back end is really a matter of resources, which has been reflected in the department's budget requests the past several years. One of the things that we can do is to move this money more quickly is make sure we've got the awarding officials within the BIA who are capable of handling the volume on both ends.
Yeah, you had pointed out that you had the same staff when you started as you have now. Okay, thank you. And with that, my time has expired, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mrs. Radewagen for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hageman. Mr. Spaan, in Secretary Newland's testimony, he mentioned that a self-governance compact has not been closed out in the history of the program. Is there a reason to include a closeout process for 638 compacts, or is that a question that should be left to negotiation between the Secretary and tribes?
Thank you very much for that question. Compacts are different than self-determination contracts. Compacts, whenever they're negotiated, they do not have a term. The compacts really set the stage for reestablishing the relationship between the tribe and the federal government. So whenever those get initiated, they're not active for a certain amount of time. What then happens is that there's funding agreements that get negotiated where individual PSFAs and program services function activities get negotiated and put into that funding agreement. That funding agreement is renegotiated periodically with the tribe and the federal government coming together. So if there's any changes that are needed, that happens within the funding agreement through a negotiation process. I think with the kind of closeout, I think there's also a difference between project versus program-based. So I think that project-based is something that does have a lot of reporting requirements and sort of a closeout.
And President Deborah Dotson, in your testimony, you mentioned that you entered into a self-governance compact by transferring items previously operated under self-determination contracts. How did your tribe determine that a self-governance compact would serve you better? And would you suggest any improvements for the negotiation process for self-governance compacts?
Thank you for the question. I was not in office at the time when we negotiated our self-governance compact. However, it gives us more flexibility to move funding around so that we can fund more programs. And the improvements I would suggest is adequate staffing would help. It would help with getting the funding out to us.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, I want to again thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony and the members for their questions. For those of you who have been watching this subcommittee over the last year, I believe that it's apparent that the things that we've really been focusing on have been economic development for our tribes, improving the economic conditions and giving them the opportunity to make decisions that are going to be in the best interest of their members. It has been one of my priorities and one of my agendas to ensure that we are recognizing and acknowledging the sovereignty and autonomy of these tribal nations so that you can do what is in the best interest, not only in the short term but the long term. Having these kinds of hearings helps us to understand what the current legislative landscape looks like, how we can streamline it, how we can make it better, and what we can do for all of our tribal members. So I appreciate the fact that you are willing to travel to Washington, D.C. I know it's not easy to get here. I have to come here from Wyoming. and go through Denver. So I have to drive 100 miles just even to catch the plane. But we very much appreciate you coming here. We don't always have a full array of folks coming here to question. I had 4 hearings today myself. And so we have so many things going on, but I do want you to understand that your testimony is extremely important to us and helps us to be better at drafting legislation that is going to be, that is again, in the long term, going to be able to help you with your management and the decisions that you're making for your members. So again, thank you very much for being here. I want to state that the members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask for you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Monday, March 11th, 2024. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. And if there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the 15-minute alert before they call votes. So I know.
This is my hearing for tomorrow.